Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-r-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today we are going to be talking about a very common topic, which is mothers and daughters, but we're going to take it deeper, and we're going to talk about mother-daughter healing. My guest today is Karen C.L. Anderson. She is a coach and the author of Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration. And she also is the author of the Difficult Mother-Daughter Journal, a guide for revealing and healing toxic generational patterns. She has created a movement for brave women who have a troubled relationship with their mothers and who want more for themselves and their lives than being defined by that troubled relationship. So without further ado, Karen, thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Oh, thank you for asking. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Awesome. Well, we talked a little bit, of course, before we hit record. And as you and I both know, we're all here because we have a mother. And for some people, that's a difficult conversation. For other people, it's not. So today, you're going to be sharing with us your own journey and what it is that brought you to write this kind of a book. So why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about why Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters?
So as I said, I have a mother, and, I had a life with ups and downs and all arounds. And my childhood, it was, had some difficulty and some trauma. And, in today's parlance, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and complex PTSD. And, the older I got, I started to realize that, I just wasn't living up to the potential, I guess, that I thought I could or should. And I just, I was struggling in a lot of ways. And interestingly, as I, into my 30s and early 40s, as I, was living my life and trying different things and learning things and starting to feel better about myself, it seemed that the more strained my relationship with my mother became. And it seemed like the happier I got, the more miserable she became and angry. And at the end of 2010, we had an email interaction. And at the end of that email interaction, she said that she was disappointed in the person I'd become. As I said, this is at a time when I was starting to feel better about myself than I'd ever had before. So based on that, I decided that I didn't want to see or talk to her anymore. And interestingly, doing that, with the title of my book, with the word separation, that separation doesn't mean literal. It doesn't have to mean a literal separation that you never see or talk to your mother again. The separation that I talk about is emotional. So even though I had said, I don't want to talk to you anymore, I felt more connected in a not good way to her and to the issues that we had, because I was not emotionally separate from her. I didn't know who I was separate from her. And so, therapy continued and other programs and things continued. And I discovered life coaching. I've kind of had not a love-hate, but I've kind of had a up and down relationship with coaching. But it was during the training that I received over the course of a year and a half at the life coach school with a woman named Brooke Castillo that I made significant progress inside myself in regards to my relationship with my mom. And she wasn't participating. At this point, I wasn't talking with her. Interestingly, though, happening at the same time was my mother's mother, my grandmother, was still alive, and she was in her 90s, and she was starting to fail in some ways. And I mean, my mother's relationship with her mother was just as fraught and unhealthy as my relationship was with my mom. And my grandmother asked if I would become her legal guardian. And so I said yes. And I have, my grandmother has 3 children. My mom is the oldest. I was the closest. I'm also my grandmother's oldest grandchild. So it kind of made sense. And that required me to legally be in touch with my mother and her siblings, my aunt and my uncle. So just to preface that by saying that I was in contact with my mother, but only sort of in this official capacity as my grandmother's legal guardian. And so, over the course of, a couple of years, as I became more secure in who I am as a woman by myself, separate from my mom, and as this healing and the coaching that I was doing, as I said, it helped me shift my perspective in ways that I didn't ever expect was possible. And I didn't want to keep it to myself. So I wrote a book that came out in 2015, which, again, we don't have to go into the title of that because the Difficult Mother's Adult Daughters replaced that book. But what that book showed me was, because it sold a lot, over 100,000 copies, and it showed me that, wow, there's a hunger for healing in this kinds of relationships. And so I revised and expanded that book, and that became Difficult Mother's Adult Daughters. I do a lot of writing. I write every day, pretty much. I send out a newsletter every week to my subscribers because I'm always learning something about mother-daughter relationships. And, my relationship with my mother evolves and I learn more. And as I said, I just can't keep it to myself because it's so, the freedom, the healing that comes from working on this relationship. I remember I used to say, oh, how much more do I have to do, And now my attitude is, wow, this is something I get to do. I get not the chills sort of just when I think that, when I realize that, wow, this is like the privilege of a lifetime to be able to heal this relationship.
All of us really do have those struggles, don't we? The reason that book sold so much is because you hit a really hot topic. And I think a lot of us don't know what to do. And
I think I approach it in a slightly different vein. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. My book is not about narcissism or, any of that stuff. One of the things that I found is, in the beginning, 10, 15 years ago when I was really struggling, was I would join these support groups, like Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers or whatever. And I don't know if my mother's a narcissist or not. People have suggested, but at this point, it almost doesn't matter because I'm the one who's managing myself in relation to her. But the support groups, at first, it was really kind of thrilling because you'd go in there and you could say, oh, she did this. And can you believe she did that? And she said this and she said that. And everyone was like, oh my God, yes. And I realized somewhere along the way that I was just kept being validated in staying small because I had a belief about myself in regards to my relationship with my mom, which is, it's whenever I say this, I kind of laugh now, but at the time it was very potent. It's not so potent anymore. I'm a pathetic loser. Mm-hmm. That's the thought that I had about myself most of my life. It's more complicated in a lot of ways, but it sort of boils down to that. And, I created lots and lots of shame for myself as a result. So recognizing that these support groups, while helpful in a certain way, were also sort of keeping me stuck.
Interesting. So can you expound a little bit on what was it about the relationship that caused you to create a belief about yourself? And can can you identify at what age that started to take root in your mind?
I think most people have what they call a core wound, emotional wound, which is based like at its basis, it's I'm not good enough or I'm not okay. I mean, I think everybody has that. And, as my journey has moved along, I've done some studying and learning around trauma. You know what? We're all basically traumatized. We all have some form of trauma. Unfortunately, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even, probably even now today, we don't know how to handle it. Our parents don't know how to handle it. They're traumatized. It's unresolved. Yes, we muddle through. It's not it doesn't have to be I was going to say a death sentence, but I don't mean death, but emotional death sentence.
So you're talking about how we all have wounds, and it's interesting because it's so true. We can be very myopic. Our parents have wounds and their parents have wounds, and there's a certain generational pattern that can happen with certain behaviors, attitudes, ways of doing things, and someone has to rise up and think differently for that to change. And that's painful in and of itself, right? So you have a core wound, your mom probably had a core wound, and so on and so on for generations. Yeah. And so rising up, you're looking back and saying, this really hurt me. And you get to choose, am I going to repeat the pattern or break the pattern?
Right. Or how am I going to even look at it? And what you said reminded me, that part of the learning and that I've done and have recognized is that core wound in women is often called a mother wound. That's like, I don't know who made that word up, but it's the pain of being a woman in a culture that doesn't value women equally. And so, you can call it patriarchy or whatever, but the pain of being a woman in a culture that doesn't value women equally, then that pain gets internalized. It's like in our DNA practically. It is a trauma. And, on the extreme end of that is hundreds of years ago, they drowned women and they stoned women and they hung women. They threw acid in their faces if they didn't fit the narrow standard of what a woman should be. And so I think what happens is that on the one hand, a mother, not consciously, but has that fear, if I'm not in this standard, then I will be cast out of the tribe, right? If they call it tribal shaming. And then if I have a daughter and she doesn't fit the cultural standard, then she might, and basically we'll die, right? If I can't attract a good man who's going to take care of me, even today, it's like still there sort of in the back of our heads. And so that fear and that wound, again, depending on the woman, depending on her own experiences, other traumas she may have, whatnot, that can then turn into, I think, personality disorders and mental illness and addictions and, to numb the pain. Mm. And so that's what gets passed down. And when the daughter, and I don't know if this is like 100% the case, but it feels like it might be, if the daughter then says, hey, you know what? No, I know I'm going to step outside the cultural norm. I'm going to write my own standards. A mother might then say, well, I didn't get to have that. I didn't have those freedoms and I am jealous and I don't like it. And so I'm going to stomp on you a little bit more. And, jealousy is normal. A lot of people, women have said to me, I can't believe my mother's jealous of me. That's disgusting. That's sick. Like, it's not, because she's human. It becomes a problem when it's unconscious and she doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah. I can totally see what you're saying. We sometimes compartmentalize relationships in such a way that we almost dehumanize them. Like those emotions wouldn't apply here because blah, 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 blah. And one of the things that I've taught my daughters is, people who say family over everything, blood is thicker than water. I think it's nice if you can prioritize your family that way, but sometimes there are people in your family that are not healthy and you have to make different choices. They don't get access to hurt you or to damage you further just because they're family. And so is there sometimes maybe we get pent up as daughters, frustration, and our mothers as daughters had pent up frustration, and can that skew what we're seeing as truth? In other words, can we over blame? Can we over criticize our mothers as well? Like maybe they didn't have the opportunities we have. They made their choices, and we don't have to stop living because they stopped living. But do we have that reverse thing happening as well, where we are being too hard on our mothers, or we are seeing things so harshly because we've fallen in love with the stories in our head?
Yeah, I think totally that. To be human is to make story. To make, I've got to be able to explain this to myself. And there's the truth. What is the truth, right? I mean, it's known that memories are faulty, and at the same time, something else that happens to women a lot is we're told, no, you don't, gaslighting, right? That didn't really happen the way you think, and maybe it didn't, but the impact that it has, right, is the impact. But absolutely, I was very attached to my story of my mother as my villain. Very, very attached to that story. The thing I like to be careful with here is that, there are some pretty awful mothers out there. And for some women, absolutely, having no contact with their mother is the healthiest thing. My advice, I guess, or what I teach is to try and have that be as clean as possible so that you like and respect yourself and put yourself in a powerful position instead of blame. Because blame, what ends up happening with blame, you're not supposed to blame others, right? So then we blame ourselves, and the blame never gets anybody anywhere. So it's then taking responsibility, which again, a lot of when I say this, some women are like, oh, it's not my fault. And why should I take responsibility? And the reason is because that's the most powerful place to be. It's not about saying like, oh no, my mother was wonderful, and, pretending that what happened didn't happen. It's acknowledging what happened and then deciding that you're not going to be defined by that. And that healing, that needs to or can take place, isn't just like flipping a switch and changing your thoughts about it necessarily. You can do that, but, it's like what happened and it wasn't the way I wanted it to be. And this also isn't about like trying to find a silver lining or, they call it spiritual bypassing or anything like that. It's like, I like to say we're standing on our stories. And I use the example of my parents getting divorced when I was 2.5. That was a traumatic experience for me as a child. And knowing that everybody's nervous systems are different, for some other child, it probably wouldn't have been a big deal. Who knows? But the story goes that my mom got on a plane. So this is mid-1960s in Connecticut, where divorce wasn't legal at the time or available or whatever. And my mom, who was maybe 24, 25 at the time, got herself on an airplane and flew to Mexico and got what was called a Quickie Divorce. And I used to hate her for this. Over time, I look at her and I say, gosh, she was a badass. That's amazing. Like at 24 in 1965 or whatever it was, she flew to Mexico. She wanted something and she went and got it. And so like being able to tell this, like I'm standing on the story now, it's not standing on me. Does that mean that I haven't, to this day, sometimes I feel grief or what would have my life been if my parents had stayed together? I don't indulge in that too often, but so it's like I can honor my experience and not hate her anymore. Because you know what? I've got a little bit of badass in me too. And I get it from my mom.
There's a comment on your website that talks about it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
That when we are going through this journey that you're talking about of learning to stand on the story and not have the story, stand on us, it's so easy to feel like the solution is to just cut all ties or to deny your own sense of being an emotion, which is both of them could be very unhealthy choice. Anytime we deny our own emotions and our own perspective, I think we are making an unhealthy choice. So what I hear you saying is there's shades of the journey, and depending on who you are and what has happened and the healing that can sometimes take place with the person who's still alive, sometimes those people don't choose to take part in that journey with you, and that's another level of decision making, right? I think it's not as straightforward is what I'm hearing you say. You really have to find that authentic place for you. And I would think, and maybe you can expound on this, that as you grow, that center might shift a little depending on where your healing journey and your understanding go. So it's not like a one and done. It's going to be this constant reevaluation and figuring out, what am I willing to, quote, put up with or deal with? What am I not willing to deal with? And where are my boundaries? And I think love and boundaries can coexist.
Well, I have a whole, the way I teach boundaries is very different from what you hear out there. But I want to say that, you said about it being all or nothing at a minimum. So, my boundary lessons, advice, whatever you want to call it, is sort of a mixture of a bunch of different things. I became certified in a process called Healthy Boundaries for Kind People. And that is a woman named Randy Buckley who created that. And it's a very powerful process. That's where we talk about what is it that we want to grow in this relationship. And, what's your bottom line value that you, in order to be in relationship, is it respect? And are we both bringing respect to the equation? It could be kindness, it could be humor, it could be, whatever it is. There's lists of values out there, and it's fun to do values inventories once in a while and be like, what is it that really I want to bring to this? The other piece of boundary advice that often gets misunderstood is that we think that it's about controlling other people's behavior and moralizing other people's behavior, and that they should do this or they shouldn't do that. And the way I teach it is we can certainly make requests of people. This is a very simplistic one, but please don't yell at me on the phone. The boundary then becomes not the other person. The other person can decide, yes, I'm going to choose not to yell on the phone, but I want to still yell on the phone. They get to decide. The boundary then is how we are going to respond. It's almost like the boundary is with us, not with them, because adults get to behave however they want to behave. So if the person continues to yell on the phone and you don't want to be around yelling, you can say, okay, I'll talk to you another time. Bye. And you hang up. And that's, again, very simplistic, but you're not moralizing. You're not saying you're bad because you yell.
I call it vilifying. You don't have to vilify another person to set boundaries or feel good about what you want. You can choose to say, this is just what I want. No one has to be bad or good for me to want this. It just is the truth for me right now.
And going back to the thing with women and how we've been socialized over hundreds and thousands of years, it's hard for women to be clear about what they want.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is I would be the first to acknowledge this, we manipulate, right? Because we don't know how to get our needs met, or we don't think we can meet our own needs.
Yeah.
So,
well, and we have that whole layer of, is it okay to have needs and express them?
Yeah.
Is that even a thing, right?
Yeah.
We're confused on, is that an okay thing? It's interesting how women get things twisted, and that's generational too.
Well, somebody wrote to me recently. I get lots of questions, and I answer the questions sometimes like advice column style. saying, I need to have a boundary with my mom because she keeps posting pictures of my children on social media and I don't want her to. And she's vilifying her mother for doing this. And, she's like, I don't know how to make her stop. In the end, I haven't actually published this because I don't know if I actually have the best advice. Because I asked her, I said, do you send her the photos and she posts them? And she said, no, she uses her phone and takes pictures, like when we come to visit. And I said, well, your mom gets to be an adult. She gets to take pictures if she wants to. If you don't want pictures of your kids on social media, that's perfectly, you're allowed to not want that. So don't bring your kids to visit. Right? That's, you've asked your mom, please don't take pictures. She's not honoring your request. So she doesn't get to see the kids.
It's so hard because I think I don't have this problem, but I know people who do. And where does the role of mother-daughter end? And I think that's the challenge. We are always a daughter. That's always the mother. So no matter how old a person gets, they feel that role. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't because it's my mom. I've had people say this, I can't because it's my mom. And I will say, is that true? If it
was a stranger doing it, what would you do?
Exactly. So if you remove the role, you're a woman in your 40s or 50s, your mom is doing something. I have had this conversation with someone and I was trying to get them to understand that we're people. Yes, they gave birth to you, but you're people. And with anybody else, how would you want it to be done? And almost like removing ourselves from the role of, I don't have a choice because it's my mom. And that's what this person was struggling with as an adult. You always have a choice. You're making a choice now, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's shifting in our heads what we are, quote, supposed to do and be as daughters well into our 40s, 50s, and 60s. Some people really feel like for the rest of their lives, if their mom says X, Y, and Z, they don't have a choice because they're the daughter.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I don't know where you stand on that.
Well, people do believe that. I mean, guilt is like one of the, ask a woman what's one of your top 3 feelings in regards to your mother. Guilt is one of them. The only reason that we feel guilty is because we think thoughts that tell us that we should or shouldn't, right? Should and shouldn't, obviously don't shit all over yourself, right? I mean, that. But, the other thing what I teach and what I'm coaching is, and this is what helps get that separation, that emotional separation I was talking about before. And this is a hard pill to swallow, but once you swallow it, you're free. And that is that your mother doesn't create your emotions. She does not make you feel guilty. You feel guilty because you think thoughts that make you feel guilty.
Yeah, I think a lot of women struggle with, where does my mother end and I begin?
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. And vice versa, too, because we think that we're causing them to feel, right? Several years ago, I was in the grocery store and I heard a woman, walking with her kid. I don't know if it was a little boy or a little girl. And she said, you make mommy so happy when all I heard was, you make mommy so happy. And I was like, no. I mean,
it's important that we're careful not to make our children responsible for our emotions, as well as our emotions being hung on someone else. I think we all do it. We do it in our relationships with our husbands, or if we're dating or whatever. And there's an awareness piece. This as a life coach, that's the first step. If you're not aware, you can't even begin to deal with it. So it has to come to your consciousness and be like, oh.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, with, talking about emotions in general and trauma for that matter, that there's a school of thought that says that trauma is simply the disconnection from ourselves and our emotions. Also we were talking before you hit record about the fact that I think, in previous generations, we didn't see that, children had any wisdom, and that, emotions also became something that we don't have time for. Shut them down. Don't be silly, don't be sad, don't feel this, don't feel that, and that's been going on for, I don't know how long. Our emotions are what drive, they are our engine. Everybody, right? And so when you say something like, oh, well, emotions have no place in the workplace. Well, actually, nothing would get done if we didn't feel something.
Right.
So, the first thing I teach women is how to feel their feelings.
Mm.
And when the other problem is that we talk about feelings in these sort of vague, thought-like ways. And feelings are just sensations in our body that we label with a word that I call an emotion. So like hot, prickly face and tight throat equals shame for me. For you, shame might feel some other way. I don't know. A warm expanse in my chest is joy. Being able to tune in. So like before, when I was telling this story about my mom on the airplane, the badass story, I felt pride. And so like I tune into the sensations that I'm feeling in my body, and I can label them, and I can then attach that to the beliefs that I have. So like I can think about my mom on that plane and feel grief, and I have in the past, or I can feel pride, right? Same circumstance, the same thing. My mother got on a plane and flew to Mexico, right?
Reframing the situation with a different perspective so that it doesn't traumatize.
Yeah.
Mm.
So emotions, I've heard people say that the trauma is the fact that we weren't allowed to be angry. We weren't allowed to be sad. We weren't allowed to be giddy and joyful, right? It's like we're too much and not enough at the same time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you and I were talking about how we accept or we make agreement with, we didn't use those terms, but essentially we make agreement with those statements, those inferences by the adults around us. If they happen to say, you're too loud, or you're too shy, or they start labeling us early, we take those on as identities when the stress in our lives could really be connected to the fact that we're not really in alignment. We're trying to align ourselves with something we were told, but not with something that we really are. We became that maybe, but it's stressful when you're out of alignment.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think the relationships that some people have with their mothers throw them out of alignment. And so I'm thinking it's that space that you gave yourself, holding that space for yourself, not knowing whether you would ever be in contact with your mother again, was such a gracious gift to yourself. Hard, and it might sound harsh to some people because everyone's different, their level of grace, forgiveness, patience, whatever. But there's different seasons of the journey when we do healing work.
Yeah.
Sometimes that space, I would say more often than not, we have to have some space somewhere where the outside noise is quieted enough so we could hear our own voice and really figure out who we are and what we want from this journey.
Yeah, totally. You said like some people wouldn't agree. And it's interesting, the journal, that mother-daughter journal, this wasn't like the driving force behind it. But what was funny was it was Christmas Day of 2018. And my husband was sick, and I got a private message on Facebook from somebody I don't know. It was a woman who said, she was very angry, and she said, I think you should write a book called Amazing Mothers and Difficult Daughters, and you're tearing mothers and daughters apart, and blah, 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 and it's never right. It's never right to ever choose not to see your mother, and blah, blah, blah. But it was a fascinating conversation that we had on Christmas Day. She was in England, of all places. So here we are, like these two women on Christmas Day, two different continents, But there's a therapist out there. His name is Dr. Joshua Coleman, and his specialty is he works with parents whose children are estranged.
Mm.
I think his work is very valuable. But in one of his recent blogs or something, he was talking about the fact that culturally, all these changes are happening. And I think especially with the internet, and things have sped up in a lot of ways, that we have access to things, and that impacts parent-child adult-child relationships in ways that I don't think they were impacted before. So that like throws a whole other wrinkle into it.
It's so true. We never have an end to the information that's coming into our minds, and books and resources, and all of them are very helpful. But back to the idea of having the space to know what we think, I think that's the greatest part of the journey. Some people may never have really thought for themselves. They thought they were thinking for themselves, but maybe they haven't been thinking for themselves. So there's this journey of, who am I, and what is it that I want to be? Who is it that I want to be? How do I want to live my life? And for some people like myself, I have a very strong compass of what I wanted from my life, even though I didn't know how to get there. I fought to get to it. And for some people, that's scary.
Yeah.
And so there's a gentleness that we have to have with ourselves through this journey of finding ourselves. And I don't mean that in that existential sort of way, of course, but just really, you and I think, are on the same page with women need to learn to value their own emotions and voice and not minimize them, whatever it is. Because I don't know about you, Karen, but there's been iterations in my journey. Sometimes my voice was angry. Sometimes where I was at was wounded. Sometimes I was grieving. So it's a journey, not a destination. So the emotional space I might be in now, if I allow myself to process it, then I get to move to that next iteration of the journey. And that's the healthiness, so not getting stuck. And that's what I'm hearing you say. People get stuck. And see, that woman you had that conversation with, for her, you were probably threatening some kind of belief she had that freaked her out, and she was busy protecting and defending herself. She was making it sound like she was protecting and defending the world, but it was really personal for her for whatever reason. And that's her journey, and understanding that we may not agree how we go about it, but you got to take the journey and make your mistakes and get your victories however it comes, right?
Yeah.
It's not a pretty process.
Well, the other thing that, like you were talking about the different iterations, I've seen this like image and seen it described in several places. And it's the idea that we travel along a spiral that moves up. And on one side is the light and one side is the dark. And as we travel back around and we revisit shame and grief and whatever, but from a different place, because we're higher up on the spiral. And so then we come back out into the light again, right? And so it's not about like, I'm going to do this work and I'm never going to be angry again, or my mother's always going to be, no, you're probably going to get pissed off at her again. Like, it's not going to be perfect ever.
That's the hard part, really, for certain personalities like mine, is that cyclical tendency of growth, that it's not a straight line. And if you don't learn the lesson, it'll come back. If you don't learn it completely, it'll come back. And because you're human, it'll probably come back anyway.
I was going to say, you come back and you learn it a different way this time, right? Yeah.
Just really leaning into process has been one of my greatest life lessons. I'm not even kidding. My personality is like, let's get this done. And then you realize, wait, I did this already.
Well, that's like, I don't know if we were recording when I said this to you, but, I used to say, oh, how much more do I have to do? And now I say, wait, I get to do this. And that has made such a difference. And there are times where I still feel like, oh, God, not again. Are you kidding me?
I so feel that. I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're like, dang it.
There's an expression in some circles. It's AFGO, and I don't know what kind of language you want on this show.
You can use a replacement word for it, because I think we know what the
another freaking growth opportunity.
I like it. I'm going to use that.
AFGO.
It's so true, though. I mean, we get this one life, and I want to squeeze as much out of it as I can, but we have these hitches. We have emotional and mental hitches, and it can be so frustrating and discouraging to spiral back past that hitch and think you've dealt with it. No, I don't want to do it again. I'll sometimes sit and be like, no, I am so done with this. And then you go, I know. I have to do this. You're like parenting yourself through the journey, right?
Totally. I mean, there's a chapter in the book. It's on remothering. Yeah. I mean, learning how to have compassion for myself was like huge. Huge.
That's probably one whole day of learning for most women. Like, you could probably sit on that for a while. We extend so much to so many other people. And I think the compassion journey is, as a mother myself, like, I have a mom, I am a mom, and I look at my daughters, and I'm always trying to figure out that teaching them what I feel is healthy at this point in my journey, and being like, okay, you've got me, you've got my mom, and you want to have healthy relationships with each one of us. And what does it look like in our home? What healthy means? I try to give my daughters permission to have that space. And
how old are they?
They're 26 and 28.
Oh, wow.
So they're women. And I say, this whole experience that we have as mother-daughter, work with me to define it that feels good for you and for me. That's kind of where I've gone, because yes, I'm your mom, but I'm not your dictator. You're another human being, right? You're another human being in the world who gets to make choices that maybe I won't agree with, and that's okay. So I think as daughters, back to that conversation with that woman who's like, what about difficult daughters and excellent moms or whatever? Sometimes we have good mothers and good daughters, but it takes work usually to get to that place, because everybody has to be, to use a common vernacular, woke, right, to what healthy is in their home, and giving each other permission to live in that space.
One of the chapters in the journal is the heading of it. All of the chapters have like a one-word heading. And the heading of this particular chapter is betray. And it's basically like, and you mentioned this earlier somewhere in the conversation about the contracts that we have, or the agreements that we have that could be possibly unhealthy.
And probably are half the time.
And so, like, which ones do you want to keep and which ones do you want to betray?
And it feels like that to a woman, because we're so loyal to the agreements that we make. Wow, that's powerful.
And, like, again, the spiral with the dark, right? There's another chapter in the book called, what is it called? Delve. And it's about shadow work. And it's about owning the parts of ourselves that we are like, oh my God, if anybody knew this about me, right? The selfish, the lazy, the, shameful, the ugly, like whatever it is that we don't want anyone, like when you can say, you know what, yep, I'm lazy, and I sure as hell am selfish too from time to time, and I'm a hypocrite, because I am. I mean, I'm serious, I'm not joking when I say this. There are times where I'm hypocritical.
Oh, aren't we all? Yes, we just aren't.
And I manipulate. I'm a manipulator from way back. And so, like, yes, I'm kind of laughing, but being able to integrate, there's a great quote, it's in the book. I think it's Carl Jung, which says, I would rather be whole than good. Right? Like, I want to be able to, because we contain multitudes, right? Like, I want to own all of it. I don't want to be rejecting parts of myself.
That is such a powerful statement right there. Don't reject parts of yourself. If we want to live whole and healthy lives as mothers or daughters or friends or whatever, we have to be honest first with ourselves. A lot of us are living in these bubbles of expectation. I know expectation has been a hang up for me, standards set really high, which it's okay to have those, but there's this gap between who I am and who I want to be, and learning to almost account for that and give grace for that and be compassionate for that and accept that, instead of feeling like the pathetic loser you were talking about.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And it does. Our mother-daughter relationships are so profound.
They really are.
That is like the primary relationship in our life.
Yep.
So profound. And so this journey that you take people on with your book and with your journal, do you also offer a program? Because for some people, the discussion is helpful, like having a place to go.
So yes, speaking of shadow and speaking of honesty, so I mentioned the whole life coach. I like being a life coach. I don't like being a life coach. I hate it. I love it. I don't want it. I want it. And part of the reason that I pushed it away and pushed it away and pushed it away was because I got it into my head that people thought that life coaches were dumb, and especially that certain people that I admire, other coaches, but not coaches who learned from the same coach that I learned from, the same school, I thought that they thought, this sounds so crazy as I'm saying it, that it wasn't good enough. And so I distanced myself. And in fact, fairly recently, I was mentioning the dog before and some issues and whatever, and a lot of shame came up. And I got some coaching from one of the coaches from the life coach school that shifted it like that for me. And I said to myself, Karen, don't be selfish. You have so much to offer people if you would just get over yourself. And so I created, actually, as a result of this journal coming out, my publisher had asked me to come up with an incentive to get people to pre-order the book late last year. So I came up with this incentive that I would run a month-long book club for anybody who pre-ordered the book and who wanted to be in this book club. And it was free. And we did that for the month of February. I had 90 women in there.
Wow.
And not all of them participated, but, a good handful of them participated. And I loved it so much that I decided to create, just to make it open to anybody, not anybody, but not men, who want to do the work. So I guess, I don't know what you call a membership program. It's not like a 6 weeks and then you're done. It's for the rest of your life, for as long as Facebook exists. Because I have a Facebook group and I run twice a month coaching calls. So it's called Make It Real, right? Because we buy these self-help books. And, it's one thing to buy it. It's one thing to read it. It's one thing to actually put the concepts into
practice,
action and practice. And so, how do we make it real in our lives? So that's my program.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Well, we have talked about the most profound relationship I think we'll ever have in our lifetimes, and the complexities that relationship presents. For some people more than others, the complexities, right? And I know that there are women maybe listening to this, that this is like water to their soul, right? And there are people who are thinking of their friends where this would be water to their soul. But it is a deep and wide conversation, and we've barely touched the surface. So you do have that resource. But for our conversation today, what kind of 3 anchors could you give to people to really begin this journey, or to just kind of question if this is a journey that they should go on?
I think viewing it as a opportunity for growth instead of some sort of punishment, or I'm doing this for her. You're healing it not for her, you're healing it for your growth. It's such a, so many women hold themselves back from things, maybe not because they're mothers specifically, but I know I did. I held myself back. I still hold myself back sometimes because what will she think? Yes. So number one, you're like, as you said, the relationship can be a well of growth and joy, even if it was hard. It really can be. When you choose to do, this is number two, when you choose to do this work, it ripples out in your life. Yes, if you have daughters, it's not so much what you're saying to them, it's what you're modeling. You're modeling care for yourself. You're modeling compassion for yourself. I mean, so many women, I have a friend who has teenage 20-something daughters, and she's complaining right now because her oldest daughter won't go to the doctor. She's in college and she's sick. I don't know what's going on, And I'm like, well, you never went to the doctor either, So like just think of it as terms of like what you're modeling. You're modeling vulnerability and compassion and badassness.
Right? That one definitely model.
You're not perfect though, right? So it's like, but even if you don't have children, right? I chose not to have children, but I have stepchildren. I have friends. I have a sister who is not same mother, half sister, and I know, and she's 9 years younger than I am, and I know that there was a period of time where I was playing out the dysfunction that I had with my mother with my sister. So that's another really good reason.
You said opportunity for growth for yourself versus doing it for her.
Yeah.
When you choose to do the work, it ripples out in your life. So model the behaviors and the attitudes you want. And what's another good anchor?
So I like to define healing as not like, oh, everything's perfect and pretty forever and ever, but that it's healing is when you transform something that was a cause of suffering or a source of suffering into something that's a source of wisdom and creativity.
Say that again. You transform something that was a cause of suffering.
Yeah, or a source of suffering into something that's a source of wisdom and creativity.
Oh.
I have become exponentially more creative as a result of this. And I don't mean like I draw pictures, but just creative. Like, I think of creativity as creating I create my experiences. Mm-hmm. I'm able to create how I feel and how I show up in the world, like intentionally. That goes back to feelings, right? I can wield my feelings.
Like a weapon.
Like a weapon of good in the world.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much, Karen. I think this is a conversation that obviously is a drop in the bucket. It's clearly not a one and done. That is for darn sure. You and I both know that work takes work. But I also know that the work is worth it.
Yeah, like I said, it's a privilege of my life to be able to do this.
Yeah.
Even if it was just me and my mom, It was so worth it. Well,
I'm glad that it went beyond you and your mom, because I really believe that the work you do is one of the most profound, I've said this before, profound and complex relationships that we have. And it's the most impactful in how we live out the rest of our lives. So thank you so much for the courage to share your journey, because it does take courage to reveal your own sense of guilt, shame, falling short, being a pathetic loser, whatever it is. That takes a lot of courage. And so I want to honor your courage and just your pressing through and doing the work that's going to change so many people's lives.
Well, thank you so much for seeing me. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Today, I've been speaking with Karen C.L. Anderson. She is a life coach, whether she likes it or not. And she is the author of Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration, and The Difficult Mother-Daughter Journal, A Guide for Revealing and Healing Toxic Generational Patterns. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 159, you are going to find links to Karen and Karen's resources there. So if this is something that just really dug at your spirit, you know what I'm saying, you get that feeling deep down in your toes, I would encourage you to go to my website, click on that link, hold a space for yourself, do a little bit of work, reach out to Karen if you need it. While you're there, please leave your name and email address. I have a gift for you. I send out periodic emails, just kind of let you know what's going on. As always, my friends, thank you for giving us your time. I know time is precious and we're all so busy, but for you to sit and have a cup of something wonderful with Karen and I today and listen to a conversation, like she said, that could have a ripple effect in your life and the lives of those around you is not time wasted. This is a gift that you give to yourself. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, we would ask that you would share this information. Share. Don't be selfish. Share this information. So thank you so much for joining us today, my friends. We so appreciate your time, and we trust that you have been blessed by this information and that the ripples will be great. Have a wonderful day. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.